as well. Folks, before you go, just a note, we have first presentations beginning. You need to go into your rooms a little bit earlier if you need to get organised. So make sure you're in your room a few minutes before your presentation begins to meet your chair and to set up. Thanks, everyone.
Me?
Oh, yeah, yes,
okay. Great. Okay, I'm just about to get us started. You've got about 14 people or so in the room.
Awesome.
More will probably drift in, but let's get you underway. So welcome everyone. This is a virtual session and one that is also being live streamed. We have an extraordinary crew of artists joining us. I believe they're all at a artistic practice retreat at Bundanon. So I know, I see the photos on social media and I'm a little jealous. It looks very, very delightful. But I'm going to leave them to introduce themselves. The section is called Practicing Art Responsibly on Country. Amy Spears here is going to lead off. Amy's an affiliated researcher to the Australian Centre. Welcome, Amy, and your amazing colleagues. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Let us know in the chat if you can't hear us, but I'm presuming everything's okay because we did a check. I'm just going to hand it over actually to Jodi. You happy to start? Yeah.
Wali waliana nimpeniriana nianabu Wali waliana nimpeniriana nianabu Yalanga Nagambi Naigang Jodi, ni Nabu, ni Baba, ni Bunj Numban Malanda Dayalang Bora, ni Mujangals, ni Nabu, ni Gundu, ni Dargang, ni Gadu, ni Darwu, ni Wandi Wandian, ni Wadi Wadi, ni Yuan, ni Darawulgal. So hello and welcome everybody. Today I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the homelands of the Darawul, the Wandi Wandian, the Yuan, the Wadi Wadi, and we meet in this place where age-old ceremonies have been held from time immemorial. We meet in this place between the mountains and the seas, where the rivers flow, where the whispers of our ancient elders past still talk through the whispers of the wind in the leaves to our ancient elders present. And those knowledges are then handed down from generation to generation. I wanted to talk to you today about Welcome to Country and the significance of Welcome to Country. You see, it happens and it starts a long time before people come onto country. There's a process we call the singing in. And before my friends here came to my country, the singing in began. You see, it was important for me to wrap my migratory Mujangals in country, in context. And so the singing began before they left their own shores. Wali waliana Mujangal. Wali waliana Mujangal. Safe travels, friends. Safe travels. Safe travels. The ancient process that the migratory friends follow gives them a clear and concise pathway as they're sung across country, embedding them in the ancient kinship roles and responsibilities, allowing them to touch, feel, and smell as they drive through country, awaiting to arrive at their destination. They travel in safety on the rhythmic melody that has been sent out before they left home. So when they arrive ready for their induction to country, to place, to community. Being sung in is a vital part so the Mudjin girls become accountable, not only to country, but to law, our L-O-R-E, and our laws, L-A-W-S. It's important that they understand and feel those L-O-R-E because it sets the governance of their future on country in yarning circles, with custodians, with community, with the trees, the river, and the mountains. These yarns will take place in circles around the kitchen table, around the kitchen sink, as we pass one another on the way to our sleeping quarters. When Mudjin girls are welcomed in through singing, when the song has been sung, they are ready for the checking in. This requires them to understand and feel a little bit about themselves. You see, they've already been, like the birds, flitting around country, jumping from tree to tree, wrestling with their new nest, fluffing their pillows. They are ready. They are ready to meet community. They are ready to understand place. And they are ready to identify their own relationships and behaviour with country. It will shape their future. After the checking in, we move to the calling in rather than the calling out. I like to call it the digging in. It reminds them of their rites of passage around the old business. We'll talk about that. They are able to move forward with their understanding of their relationship to kinship, the relationship to custodians, to the place, to country, to the environment. They are embedded through a symbiotic relationship to the life of country, their Mudjin goals. And in the final part, country will create the Nangamai Muru, the dreaming pathway for them to continue on with the old business. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodi.
Jingiwalu Walu, Nayigan Jundal. I hope your spirit is well. I'm privileged to be here on Gumia, Darawal, Wadi Wadi, Yuan, and Wandiwanian country, your country. I acknowledge and offer my respect to your ancestors, your elders, past, present, and emerging, and to you as today's custodian. As a visitor and Bundanon Art Museum custodian, and on behalf of my colleagues, thank you for welcoming us. Thank you for having us on your land. I offer my respect for your unceded, ongoing, oldest custodianship of this land in the world. I also acknowledge your survival, the lasting resistance and resilience, and your rightful equal place in society. I pay my respect to your ancient specialized relationship with this land and your successful protection of it and your traditional knowledges over many thousands of years. I also acknowledge my lands, my ancestors and elders and all First Nations, all lands, the mountains and all the waters, fresh water, sweet water, bitter water and salt. I acknowledge the significance of truth-telling songlines in our ancestral inheritance, all our knowledge keepers, and the revitalisation of our culture, our histories, our law, our ways, living and creativity. I offer my respect to the land, ancestors and elders and community of the Naam Wurundjeri where you are all meeting. Please accept my learning of my Bundanon language as a gift, a sign of my respect and my undertaking to care for your country during my visit. Jingiwalu walu na yikin jundal, nagagani yugum Bundanon yugum bekanakin, najiani biani yugum darul jugan, nagali jana mala jugan, na yigin jundal, nagali gama mala jugan. Hello, I hope your spirit is well. I am Jundal. I belong to Bundanon Yugambeh Kanakni country, and I acknowledge all the people of this land. I do not harm this country here. My name is Jundal, and I will look after this country.
Did you want to talk about?
Sure.
Yeah, you okay?
Yeah. You know, this is the big work, right?
This is the big
I'm
work.
going to do it.
Parts floating on screen there.
So let me give you some context to my response to Jodi's Welcome to Country. I've been thinking about protocols for a little while, and I'm very interested in relationships, not just between humans, but humans and non-humans, and in part thinking about protocols of what I'm starting to call co-care. In thinking about a welcome to country or an acknowledgement and ideas of respect, reciprocity and ceremony in communication, I love the welcome to country and acknowledgement ceremonies. And in the 21st century, I can see these as potential social protocols that might help us all achieve multiple goals at once. I've been trying to imagine how a response might sound in the 21st century. I've been imagining what could we say and what would be perhaps be allowed to collaborate on inside the privilege of ceremonial conversation, of asking permission and accepting responsibility, both are practical and usable today. Inside these ideas I have about co-care, I have ideas about conducting business and whose business is this or whose business is that, and how do we find ways to take care of each other and others while we're taking care of business. But the business keeps on changing and we need it to. So then who does what work? To my way of thinking, some business is new business and some old that coexist as part of multiple truths being true at the same time. So what is an example of old business? I'll hand it over to Amy to explain.
Thank you, Jundal. Jundal gave us this kind of gift at one point about this idea of old business, and my interpretation of it is First Peoples have spent a lot of time trying to explain to us kind of settlers that certain things are kind of, I don't know, offensive or problematic or not quite right to take place. And they've done a lot of kind of groundwork trying to educate us, but there's certain things that, you know, they need to get on and do now, which is, you know, the kind of new business. And so Jundal gave us the kind of job of taking care of the old business. And that's the stuff that, like, there's plenty of kind of First Peoples resources out there telling us, what to do. And I think particularly you'll see in the presentations that are about to come up, most of the artists here that are non-Indigenous have tried to respond to the idea of old business, but it's basically just the stuff like, I don't know, problematic monuments and cultural appropriation, those sorts of things. And it's just been very generous of John Dale to explain to us that that's kind of our job to take up. Before we kind of proceed, I just want to kind of introduce everyone a bit more carefully than what's in the kind of bios and write-ups in the program. I'd like to acknowledge we are meeting on the Darawal and Durga country, and we're very grateful to Jodi Edwards, who's been hosting us on during our time here at Bundanon, and I'll explain what Bundanon is in a second. But Jodi, we're very we have a relationship with Jodi that started when Jodi joined myself and some other staff here at RMIT as a postdoctoral Indigenous fellow. She's since moved on to University of Wollongong, and we're all kind of heartbroken about that. But we've spent the last 10 days with Jodi and her community, who she's been generously inviting us bringing us to engaging us with, and we plan to come back and hassle Jodi more into the future. And before I continue, I also just want to kind of introduce Jundal Strang-Yettica, who spoke so profoundly and beautifully earlier. Jundal, we're really lucky to join us as a kind of guest artist. And who lives in the kind of local area and brings with her lots of kind of superb and kind of incisive knowledge that we've been very lucky to be around. And then also I want to mention Karen Cummings, who we might bring on camera in a second. Karen also lives around in the local area, is good friends with Jodi, and she's also joined us with her beautiful kind of sound practice. Oh, there seems to be something on the camera. It's a fly.
And introduce the flies.
I would like to introduce the flies and all the non-human entities that keep crawling around in our beds and joining us in this room. So I should also introduce, we've got a series of kind of researchers from RMIT, Polly Stanton, Kelly Hussey-Smith, Alan Hill, Marnie Badham, and myself, Amy Spears. And then on top of that, we also have the fabulous Stephen Liu, who you'll meet in a sec, who's from UNSW. But also I should introduce you to this wild and insane building that we're in. It's the Boyd Education Centre, award-winning by architect Glenn Murcutt. And this is a painting by Arthur Boyd, this kind of slightly oppressive large painting that hovers over our kind of meeting and working area. But we're basically on at Bundanon, which is in Uluru, New South Wales. It's Australia's largest residency program and the former residence of celebrated painter Arthur Boyd. But we're all here on a 10-day residency, and the questions we've been investigating while we're here are, what are our responsibilities when responding artistically to First Peoples country, land that is not our own, land that was stolen by colonizers? How can we pay our respects to cultural custodians, their ancestors, elders, and country, and centre their sovereignty and our creative responses while visiting? We have been exploring, in short, what business is ours on this country. Despite an acknowledgement of country on Bundanon's website, the landscape is largely absent of signs that this is Darawal and Durga country. We've actively worked to disrupt the commonplace model of artists in residence programs that do little to connect visiting artists to custodians. Jodi has generously facilitated for us a range of engagements with local custodians, including artists, weavers, storytellers, possum skin cloak makers, knowledge keepers, and language revitalisers, to ground us on this country and, as Jodi mentioned, dig us in. We were welcomed to country with a smoking ceremony by, apologies if I get this wrong, Gamia Darawal and Durga language custodian Drew Longbottom from Gadigal Murring, who also stayed with us for a yarn and a walk on country where we learn about cultural burning and bush food. On the second day of our residency, Auntie Jenny Wenzel and her daughter Corrine Tillett of Bundanon Art led us through a weaving workshop, and we've been honoured to have Auntie Lauren Chapman Carpenter join us for yarning and story sharing several times over the residency. She's coming back to take us on a cultural walk tomorrow. We were also visited by a TAFE class of students studying Aboriginal culture and art practices, Cert 2 and 3, led by Gomeroi artist Warwick Keane. We visited Shell Harbour to experience that so talented Jodi Edwards bronze public artwork depicting a local dreaming story about Buri Buri the whale, as well as Yiran Muru, an outdoor interpretive play space that encourages children to learn local Aboriginal stories and Dharawal language. Jodi's made a park, a public artwork, and even a recipe book, and we've been able to kind of encounter country through her amazing lenses this way. We've also been lucky to be joined on this residency by Gurungai Yuan artist and facilitator Amanda Reynolds, who taught us about possum skin cloak making and how to twine. So without further ado, I just wanted to say that over the 10 days, we've contemplated and learnt about the significance of slowing down, attuning to country, sharing knowledge and story, and knowing our business. Over the next 25 minutes or so with the remaining presentation, artists Polly, Kelly, Alan, Marnie, Stephen, Amy, and Karen will take up John Dahl's practice of responding carefully to these kind of generous welcomes we've been given, and share with you short work in progress, creative responses to our time here on country with custodians and local artists. Thanks very much.
Day 1, field notes. Unfamiliar country, uninvited guests, impulse to make sense. Jodi acknowledges her land and elders in language. This settles me, but still, restless sleep. Day 2, field notes. Smoking ceremony. Nadinji. Drew teaches us the word in language that means appreciation. The frequency of country, he says, is in the rocks. Can I walk more softly on your land? I stop to think of someone who has passed. Day 3, field notes. Auntie Jenny and Corinne weave stories, patient teacher wrapping my skin around my bones. Stories of bush camp and fish. Auntie Lauren spreads her arms, looking side to side. Lobster, oysters, mullet. Day 4, field notes. Awake with the sun. As the mist lifts from the river, Mama Kangaroo locks eyes with me. Jundal reminds us that Ally's work is in doing the old business. She is the bridge. She speaks of trees. We rest well. Day 5. Where the fresh water meets the salt water is a special place. I toss the line out, I pull it in, toss out, pull in, toss out, pull in. The mullets jump out of the water, laughing at my choreography. Jodi sings up the river. Black duck, there is poison from upstream. Day 6, field notes. Dirty feet, bug bites, more coffee, please. I trace my finger along the winding slope, shape of the river. Which direction to the sea? Grandmother mountain, whale story, windy playground, family, stars in the night. Day 7, field notes. I think I've lost a day. Cloaks, ochre, cicadas, the cockatoos join in. Will it rain? Out to the sea and over the mountain, says Amanda. Out to the sea and over the mountain. out to the sea and over the mountain. I wonder how long it would take me to twine for a hammock. Day 8, field notes. I trace my steps again today. Hosts, teaching, uninvited guests, cultural custodians, generosity, creatives, artists, settlers, institutions, old business. Colonial violence is not history. Missed opportunities. Wanting to find reciprocity.
What you're about to hear after I finish speaking is something that we worked on Monday at twilight on the wharf over the Shoalhaven River. And it's part of a practice that I'm now coming to embed more deeply, which is about listening and responding with voice and connecting to place. We often hear, and our hearing is conditioned by who we are and where we're placed in the landscape, and there are voices that we don't really hear. So my practice is about finding the underheard, both human and non-human, and trying to bring them to the forefront. So this is what we did.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, this is Alan. Thanks, Karen. My response, like others, has bounces off a variety of dialogues we've been having here, while also attempting to connect with the conference themes and earlier work. First and foremost, my project is a response to a short film Jodi shared with us, called Voice of Jira, or Grandmother Mountain, which beautifully encapsulates the significance of Jira from a Darawal woman's perspective. Afterwards, however, Jodi shared with us a number of difficulties she had encountered in producing the film, particularly in dealing with the Scouts, the Girl Guides, and the Archery Club, who all occupy parts of Jira. This included having to pay for access, and confrontations with extremely officious employees and bureaucracies. This struck me as yet another example of Jundal's old business and seemed like something that I might have some responsibility to deal with, given the colonial nature of these institutions and attitudes. It also seemed to connect with the conference's foregrounding of the centrality of corrupt land relations, and importantly, the way in which the failure to recognize these secures settler futurity. For me, this strongly resonated with Ariella Aisha Azoulay's rethinking of photography through political theory. A feature of Azoulay's work is the concept of regime-made disaster, which I think is an apt description of the corrupt land relations in settler colonies like Australia. In response, she argues that we need to establish civil discourses, including through photography, which, quote, insist on delineating the full field of vision in which the disaster unfolds, so as to lay bare the blueprint of the regime. So yesterday I decided to go to Jira to attempt to reveal something of this blueprint and the corrupt land relations that Jodi had to deal with in her attempt to connect to her country. The old business that needs to be profoundly reorganized.
We're sitting here in a room on the top of the hill, overlooking the Shoalhaven River. We're visiting the lands of the people of the Darawal and Darugha language groups. The view from our accommodation is framed by a set of large wooden and glass sliding doors. The view created by the door frame is reminiscent of a European landscape painting. The heavy frame is a viewing platform of sorts, funneling and perhaps flattening our attention into this one view. Although this view holds many worlds within its framing also holds distance, as if to say, look at me up here, separate to the land out there. I've learned to be wary of this form of distancing. The perceived neutrality of the frame, it's part of the old business, as Jundal says. It's just that sometimes it's harder to see. We are learning about the responsibility that comes with visiting someone else's country. Over dinner, Jodi talks about hearing versus listening. She wants us to consider what it might mean to hear. Listening requires a reflection on self, but hearing might allow us to decenter ourselves. I can't stop thinking about she-oaks. Drew tells us that the spiky pods they drop deter snakes because they don't like the sensation on their skin. This means it's a good place to hang out with babies and small children. My skin hears more when my eyes are closed.
Hello, this is Amy Spears here. I just I want to give like a quick little trigger warning. We will be talking about desecration of Aboriginal human remains. So if you don't have bandwidth for that, you might want to tune out. On the first day, we were invited to introduce ourselves to Drew Longbottom, who'd welcomed us in, and I sort of told Drew that my research is interested in what non-Indigenous artists can do to sort of contribute to truth-telling about Australia's colonial history. And he immediately interrupted us going around the circle doing the introductions, and because he wanted to tell me the story about Alexander Berry and Arawara. And I guess I took up this old business that Drew had given me, and I thought about ways I could, in this very short period of time that we're here, intervene or at least help share the knowledge that Drew had given me. So what I've done is written a draft edit for a Wikipedia section to add to the Alexander Berry Wikipedia page. So at present, when you do a casual Google search, you don't really find out about the heinous things that Alexander did. So I just wanted to make it a little bit more present online so that when visitors come, they might find out about it. And I'm hoping that what you do while I read out the words is look past this ridiculous monument to Alexander and look through to Drew's country on the other side. So I'll read out my draft entry. I'm still tweaking it if you have any suggestions. Okay, the heading is participation in the removal and trade of Aboriginal human remains. Alexander Berry was a phrenologist who actively traded in Aboriginal human remains. Evidence contained within Berry's correspondences confirms that he traded the skulls of an Aboriginal man, a woman, and a Maori person with the Edinburgh Museum in 1820. A letter dated 20th of August 1827 by Berry to an unnamed party suspected to be a correspondent at the Edinburgh Museum details the dispatch of a human skull that Berry notes are the human remains of Arawara. Arawara was a leader of the Yuin people who carried out a cultural duty to protect country by opposing the encroachment of cedar getters who were felling and decimating the prized red cedar trees growing in the region. Berry's correspondence describes Arawara's defense of Yuin country that included the killing of settlers as crimes. Yuin people however, consider Arawara a resistance fighter and a warrior, a protector, hero to our people. Berry is believed to have obtained Arawara's skull by clandestine dismemberment, exhuming it from the leader's burial site after his death. Berry describes the location and circumstances of Arawara's burial in detail in his correspondence, dated 20th of August, 1827. The location of Arawara's skull is today unknown, but researchers are combining colonial records and Yuin cultural knowledge to piece together information with the hope of locating and repatriating the remains of a significant ancestor to the Yuin community. Today, monuments to Alexander Berry in the region, as well as the town of Berry, named after him, celebrate Berry's early contributions to the region of Shoalhaven, but popular history makes no mention of Berry's disturbance, removal, and trade of Aboriginal human remains. Yuin researcher Marlene Longbottom has described the monument to Berry on the Princes Highway as offensive and antithetical to First Peoples' calls for truth-telling, as she says, quote, "It actually wipes away our history and stories by replacing over the top a narrative of a white settler who stole land along with the bodies of Aboriginal people," unquote. While the commemorations to Berry remain in place, a monument to another contentious phrenologist and colonial figure, William Crowther, who stole and traded Tasmanian Aboriginal human remains, will be removed by the city of Hobart from Franklin Square, Hobart, in recognition of the pain it causes Aboriginal people. Thank you.
And we just have one final work before we open up for discussion.
What is the field? Work is hearing, as noted, as we ate prawns on either side of the dark moon. In the recipe, essences of bush, cultures, Davidson, bribery, finger lime. In polite bottles, tinctures for decorous, conversation, confectionery for digestion. In a building that touches the earth, heavy, framed, view, stagnant, water. The wombats burrow under but are not let in. The river feels, the voice is never buoyed. Songlines and water laws of the Dharawal romanticized from afar, but never, ever seeded. It is getting harder to practice in such disinvitation. Building, dwelling, thinking is old business to bury old Berry and his web of wickedness. Exhaustion sets in for the Justice League of Tree Guardians. Care for allies who resist. Colonial violence is not history, but disinvitations to custodianship. On Oak School, the old biologist said, the spider's web is fly-like, and the fly likes it to death. There is a tone to each, animal, plant, hearing, as profound ways of reorganizing, learning. A pharmacon of bush essences. Look, artists sniffing bottles, revoicing the vibration tone. Plants, animals, and us connect. Truth-telling using chopsticks in deadly indigenous reciprocity.
Awesome, we're back. Hello.
We've got ample time for discussion now.
I'm delighted. We did really good timing on this.
Really good. That was, there's all kinds of things happening in my brain that was just really beautiful and meditative and challenging. And yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And Jodi, you might like to know that your dear friend Lou Bennett is here in the room and says hi. So we have some time. There'll be Matt's got the roving mic. So reflections, comments, questions, feelings. Lou.
G'day, folks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you for sharing your words, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions. I think I'll just leave this question open for any of you to answer. I'm not going to direct it at one person. One of the issues as a First Nations artist that I find, and educator that I find, that is a constant a concern is identifying two things. When we're sharing our culture, how do we teach non-Aboriginal people about the sharing of knowledge and the appropriate way to use knowledge versus appropriation? What's the distinction there? And that might be something for the Aboriginal women in that my Dundal there, my cousin, my little sissy, and Jodi to maybe kick off.
I think for me, it's in the singing in, the digging in, and that really that placing someone on country, that when it all begins before you actually get to country, before you get to the stories, so that people are able to understand what is happening, what is the LORE, and the responsibility of understanding that sometimes you're shared a knowledge, but that knowledge is for you, not for you to pass on to others. And so it becomes in that latter stage of the digging in that they understand that it's a role of you're looking after that old business so that this new business that is also cultural business stays with its rightful custodians.
And I'd like to add, absolutely, I think your question highlights the absolute importance of place and relationship with the community where your feet are. I think, that thing about building trust comes with, over time, perhaps those lessons about how to ask the right questions about what people can and can't share. I think your question highlights the importance of being in place and building relationships. I also think that perhaps there is some space for us to begin to understand in more, publicly and openly shared ceremonies. Are there ways to invite non-Indigenous people to be able to participate in some of those types of ceremonies as one way of demonstrating a generosity for one thing, and role modeling inclusion as our allies take on what we've started to call old business. So I hope that sort of answers the question. It's lovely to see you, by the way.
Yes, you.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you all for great presentations and a virtual step into your experiences of the last 10 days. It's very generous of you all to share that. I wonder collectively, individually for all of you, how the experience has enabled some questionings about the traditions of artists in residency, of being invited, uninvited, self-invited onto country, onto sovereign lands. And I'm very appreciative of this clarity of distinction that you all seem to have be behind, this new business and old business, as a way of making a distinction about the possibilities for artists stepping into artist residency kind of conventions. So I wonder if you could just, if any of you have any reflections on a potential refining, repositioning of what the role of an artist's residency might be. And perhaps that bears relationship to old business from what I'm picking up from you. Any further elaborations on that would be delighted to hear.
I'll start and hand over. My name is Marnie Batten. Artist residencies, in particular context and site responsive residencies, have been something that I've been very interested in my socially engaged arts practice. I've been thinking a lot about that relationship between guest and host, artists, cultural custodians, and actually seeing institutions sort of not be mediators, but actually being buildings. In our experience here, our host in its entirety is the country that we're on through the welcoming of Jodi and her community, 100%. Each of us as artists and researchers have experienced residencies in different ways, getting away from our individual daily lives to reflect on our own work, on place, what have you. In this instance, it's about a coming together and getting to work. We didn't intend to come out and make a series of, fully developed individual works. These are gestures in response to what we've learned while being here. So I think many of us have been practicing hearing and listening before trying to make sense. So, it's been an entirely different experience for us, many of us who have done those residencies before. But I think we need to redefine how we develop artist residencies. This is also thinking about projects in place, public art, all of those sorts of things. How are we working within an existing cultural framework? And how do we respectfully find ways to understand that with invitation? And what do we do if we don't have that invitation?
Anyone else want to respond to that question? I have a question if I'm allowed, but I just want to give anyone else space to respond to that one.
No, I think.
Yeah. Okay. My question, if I may, I'm wanting to interrogate a little more, understand a little more the old business, new business question, and particularly as it connects to ideas of truth telling. As I have an ongoing worry about truth telling and who it's for, and the transformative effects that are imagined. It seems to me we have told a lot of truths in this country, on this continent. First Nations have told a lot of truths. The historical record has been revised. And I think what we keep running up against is the settlers' unwillingness to be moved by truths, I guess. Truths can be heard and acknowledged, but how are they transformative? How do we anticipate truth telling leading to transformation? I think bringing them home report, the report into the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families is, the key historical example that I think of where really painful truths were told. And not only did that unleash the history wars and, did the most committed conservative settlers amongst us choose to double down on their version of history, it also has had no impact on the removal of Aboriginal children from their families. That, in fact, has escalated. And so I worry a little as we enter what I think is going to be a new era of truth-telling in Australia. We're seeing really important work happening here in Victoria led by the Yurok Justice Commission. There's something that's so, I hear it all the time from First Nations friends and colleagues, how much they yearn for this truth-telling, how important it is. And I fear that the result is going to be more pain and disappointment because I don't feel like my people are worthy of those truths, or at least in the sense that we're unwilling to be moved enough to actually change the way we live on stolen land. So Amy, I'm interested in your reflection on that because I know that some of your practice centers around truth-telling. And Jodi, I'm interested in how you think about old business and new business in relation to that. If old business is the work of non-Indigenous people, who is it for, and how do we ensure that it has the impacts that we all desperately want it to have?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, okay. Hi, Jundal here, everyone. Ideas about, or my thoughts about new business and old business are just quite new in my head. But the ideas are about this hope that non-Indigenous Australia can somehow, through our allies, start to take responsibility for each other, so that things like appropriation of Aboriginal arts, symbols and things like that is not work. It was work perhaps that I would do maybe 25 years ago. I can't, the way I describe it in terms of my own practice, I can't keep chasing up that old business as I try to build bridges and put protections around the relationship between like knowledge keepers, cultural revitalisation people and our allies. I can't chase up that old business. I need non-Indigenous Australia to start to look after their own in those sort of circumstances. I won't speak to the issues brought up in the report that you mentioned as such, except to say that I agree with your concerns. I have similar concerns myself, and well, it's too late, I think, to prevent the requirement of a report like that again, but that we do need some kind of formulated response, because I actually think in not having that feeling of closure of any kind as a response from non-Indigenous Australia has actually in some ways become a re-traumatization of the people that spent their time telling their truth. So that's as far as I'll go on that.
Gosh, I mean, you know how to ask a hard question, Sarah. But
Sorry,
it's a good one. Look, we've talked a little bit about ways that art can potentially kind of budge people's hearts a little bit, and we've talked about different strategies while we're here, like, you know, using humor instead of, you know, the kind of dry sort of deadening voice of kind of doom that sometimes you get in video art pieces about colonial violence. So, I mean, we've been sort of thinking about different kinds of strategies where we might be able to convey these truths in ways that are a little bit disarming, or you know, done in ways that people don't quite expect. I don't know. I mean, I've I've been studying artworks where people, you know, truths have been told and feelings have been shifted. It is gradual. Last night I spoke to a group of lighting students in London about my work on Picnic and Hanging Rock, and they're planning to do a production of Picnic and Hanging Rock in London, but they're now sort of thinking about ways that they can foreground the sovereignty of the Jara and the Wurundjeri and the Tangarong in their production in London. So I guess like
they promised to remove veranda on a crane, I think it'll be fine.
We've also been talking about how we can get Anne Lambert out to remove herself with the crane.
On the crane, yes, excellent.
This is a long-term project idea for me. But yeah, I mean, I've also seen the other thing. It's like non-Indigenous people taking some level of responsibility for these stories. I might not persuade every non-Indigenous person, but I've seen that it's healing for First Nations people, and I feel like that is also kind of has some. It allows a bit of capaciousness and a bit of hope, but I don't know. I don't have the answer though.
Well, I think that's at the root of my who is it for. Like I can see that taking down the Crowther Monument is a healing thing. Like I see that, you know, not having to confront a physical piece of colonial violence in your day-to-day life is a healing thing. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough.
Can I add to that?
Let's start.
I think in terms of sorry, you know, who receives the truth, regardless, the truth when told will be received, and there is a responsibility for that reception, regardless of who we are. And I'm speaking here as a person of color, in a sense that what we have attempted to do in this residency in very different ways is to look at, as Amy has said, different ways of attending once that truth is received. If we go back to the old ways and the old visits, if we, you know, for example, take history, you know, with a very oculocentric way or a method, if we take, you know, art as being the kind of material representation of something, we of course run into cultural appropriation, in a significant way. And I have a feeling, and this residency has made me think quite a bit, that this responsibility comes from building our own capacities to undertake truth when received in kind of almost using both our expertise and our creativity, but also using our kind of sensibility and our senses in much more, in very different ways. We hold capacities within us for truth reception that we don't practice. And in my work, which I deal with food, which is a kind of, on one hand, very banal topic, on the other hand, universal. And we think it as a universal right to be fed. But truth in food, or at least in foodways, it comes to us in very, very different ways that philosophy has forgotten, that science has dismissed. Ideas of intuition, ideas of a type of sensorium that does carry culture, that do carry the stories, and the work that we've in terms of what I've attempted to do here is to almost close the gap in terms of looking after these truths that has come out through the residency, by looking after the knowledge holders and the knowledge transmitters as allies, and also providing the bridge, as Jindal is saying, between allies and knowledge holders, so that these stories can continue. And they continue in different ways as opposed to just a kind of narrative sort of approach, right? Or symbolic approach, which again is ripe for appropriation. But if we actually carry these stories and connect them through different senses that are already in us, that's the responsibility for us as receptors.
Thank you. That's really helped me, because what you're describing there is a relation. And I think that the way a lot of truth telling is represented is that, it's a truth being transmitted and then with an attempt to persuade. And, I just don't think that's where the future lies. I don't think the settler state has shown itself to be persuadable. But if we're talking about relations, if we're talking about building truths and sharing truths between knowledge holders and others, then we're talking about a relation, and that's where it's all happening. We've got about 10 minutes left. The question there, and then one up the back. I'll stop hogging the mic.
Thank you Hi, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. I suppose following on from your conversation and this idea of truth telling, how do you make spaces safe to tell the truth for those who tell it and also who those receive it? Because sometimes we've tried that and people are punished for actually telling the truth. So particularly after what's happened, how do we create these spaces creatively, socially, publicly, so people can do that?
It's in the grounding in and the digging in. Creating a safe space and sharing of knowledge isn't about persuasion as such. Creating space for truth telling is not about creating a safe space, because the safe space has had the garbage thrown in there. And so no matter how much garbage you take out of that space, there's always going to be remnants of the garbage, the spillage. And so what the idea or what the way in which artists do it is not to create the space, but actually share the trauma, to share the truth. And then it's up to the receiver how they react, what they do with that information that you now have. And yes, I understand that people have been ridiculed and ostracized for telling the truth. But that's in the braveness, right? That's in the braveness of the person willing to stand up and say, this is my truth. And that's cleaning a little bit of their own backyard in some cases, but it's also in the pointing out that these existed. We've now unloaded that, we've now shared that, we've now helped you feel that space, we've now invited you into country, to listen to country, to feel country, because it's just not only the human travellers that received those atrocious things that have happened in the past, it's also country. You know, the trees were raped and pillaged from country. The skies have had rockets shot through them and put holes inside of their hearts. And now they're coming after sea country. And so that truth is in acknowledging what is happening for the benefit of others.
We've got one more question and then we'll wrap this up.
Hi, thank you for all the knowledge you've shared. I am making work in where I have memories from my grandparents where they lived, where my mother was born in Western Victoria, in Gunditjmara, Jabberung. It's right on the border. And I still haven't been able to find anyone to talk to about that actual land. So I was just wondering if you have anything to share for land, which for a non-Indigenous person like me, about land which I can't get a smoking ceremony or welcome to country there because I haven't been able to talk to someone who has that, who can share that knowledge, or I think it's a difficult area as well. It's a very small town, and and I also have a question about using the word site specific, as I have memories on these places I've chosen there. I feel like using the word site is sort of emotionless for me, and I was just wondering if there's any problem with the word site when looking at land and country.
Anyone who hasn't talked want to talk? You guys want to talk?
Old business.
Old business. Go on, Junda.
No.
Yeah. Kelly, do you want to? You and Kelly?
Well, there's no answer for that question. If the relations are not there, and if cultural custodians are not receptive to your approach, then I think it's not the right time for you to pursue that avenue. That would be my reading of that situation.
Sorry, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but sometimes in communities, we work on relationships, and so because you would like a smoking ceremony, because you might like, you know, to use a site-specific place, it doesn't mean that community have to oblige that. That's that colonial settler ideology of, it'll be okay, I'll get a smoking ceremony and I'll get that. And but how many cups of tea have you had? You know, even as an Aboriginal person who's coming on someone else's country, I don't get knowledge shared with me just because I'm a black fella, right? I mean, I have to go, I have to introduce myself, we have to find out where the common ground is, where the common relationship is. We have to have multiple cups of tea over multiple times. And if I just go there once and expect that I'm going to have all these great knowledges shared to me from countrymen, that, you know, is not going to happen. It's about the relationship I develop over a long time. So it's that singing in. So like before everybody came here, I was speaking to our old people on country, letting them know that some artists are coming from out of town. I'm singing them every day, unbeknownst to them, really. I'm singing across country. I'm talking to country. I'm letting country know that these people are coming, and it's up to country to welcome them. I'm going to tell them about what the protocols are. We're going to have old people come in and let them know the stories of country. And then, you know, if they came on country and, you know, dropped a cigarette butt or threw their empty glass at the kangaroo or the wombat, then country will deal with that country way. And so it's about, I just feel like that developing a relationship can take years. It might not just happen. And you have to expect if that is a place where colonial invasion, for want of a better word, has created tensions amongst community, then one smoking ceremony on what seems to be Switzerland won't solve that problem. The communication between families, there's a lot of work that has to be done to heal people in that community before people in that community can go, okay, yeah, we're ready now. We're ready to share culture, country, and we're ready to, a smoking ceremony isn't just about cleansing the ground and cleansing you. There's lots of medicinal purposes around it. The smoking ceremony is also about the giving of heart. And so people in your country are not ready to give their heart yet. So just be patient and don't be in a rush. It mightn't even happen in your lifetime.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. One of the things I think is probably helpful to know is that getting a welcome to country or a smoking ceremony is actually not a fee-for-service activity. I think that one of the things that happens in these changing times is that it's very easy for us to put our own old sort of capitalist definitions around sorts of things, to think that if we use money, we are entitled to give it, when in fact these times of acknowledgement and welcome to country are actually an invitation of generosity, that are an invitation into ancient ceremony in the modern world. So there are those things that still apply about it's important to build a relationship, that because we have money doesn't mean we're actually entitled to have these things, and that perhaps what we can give or people can give instead is relationship. And that might be some way to getting some trust happening between you and country.
I also just want to quickly say that, like, my experience of working at Hanging Rock wasn't kind of easy, and I tried to talk to the custodians, but they were in boundary negotiations. But I guess I saw that as an invitation to kind of understand why those relationships were broken, not just between themselves, but also between kind of settlers and First Peoples. And so that my artwork became kind of trying to kind of understand that kind of disconnect and why it exists. And so I'm just like, maybe I'm just trying to be not discouraging you, but just saying, like, maybe there's just something else that you can look at that's about the relations, but like it's about the lack of or the disconnect. I don't know.
That might contribute.
Yeah, that might contribute to building healing and connection.
Yeah.
I think I have looked at the disconnect. I actually haven't asked anyone for a smoking ceremony. I wasn't trying to pay anyone for a smoking ceremony. I'm just saying there wasn't anyone to, like, I have spoken to a lot of people and I've been shared knowledge from around the area, but not the actual area where my mother was born. I still don't know who to even ask. So there's big holes in it for me. And I just don't want to, I'm just looking for cultural safety for myself to go on that land, because I have met my own memories of growing up there without, my memories have no First Nations stories or truth or and they still don't. I still go to that land and there's no stories or there's some around, but not from that actual land. And I'm just wondering, because I've chosen that land because of specific memories I have. And I'm looking at it from a cultural safety perspective. Yeah, if there's any other bridges, I am going around it, and I'm reading material of how other people have done it. But I just wondering if there's any other knowledge, if there's any other way to approach it.
Can I just briefly mention about your question on site specificity, and perhaps this may help. We've looked at site not just as a particular place or a location. Site continues in stories in so many different and networked ways, and that I've come to realize that, you know, everything from trees and seeds to leaves are connected both in time to trees past and into the future of what they would become. And this expands sight on one hand, but it also, the specificity is in this place and in this time and in these relations. Again, speaking from, you know, someone who's, as people of colour in Australia, we are replete with stories of our own. And these stories, again, while they may seem site-specific, that they're grounded in a particular place, which they certainly are, these stories are always already intersected by numerous other stories which are perhaps untold. And that it would be, you know, for me, it would be to go back to these stories. And I do have a kind of connection back to that part of Western Victoria. And just to see where these stories might intersect, and we might find them in very different places and different times. And I think then, you know, there is a kind of reciprocity within storytelling that could happen.
You. We're just over time into lunch now, so I'm going to gently wrap us up. Thank you for an incredibly beautiful session. It's really incredibly generous of you to share with this conference this small part of your residency. It feels like, as a non-artist, I'm just wildly jealous, really. When do I get a retreat, a residency? So thank you very much. I hope you have many more days together of continuing this work. Amy, I'll be picking your brains about that soon. But really incredibly generous. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us. Yeah. Have a great conference.